Today's guest is Dr. Christopher Willard. I actually met him, like I call it tentacle relationships, through one of our clients. So one of our clients told me to check out Hunter Clark Fields, who's a mindfulness mama mentor, and Dr. Chris, I in Manhattan. And so I went to it, and then she was doing a parenting summit like the week after. Oh, good, I could see you.
I made it.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, so that's where I was watching her parenting summit and saw Dr. Christopher Willard and was like, perfect. So we got in touch a few weeks ago and scheduled this interview, and I'm so excited. But before we even get into it, why don't you talk a little bit, Chris, about your background and what you do, because it's a lot.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. I do a lot. I was just off the phone. Someone's like, "What do you do?" I was like, "Well, I see like 12 or 15 clients a week, and then a couple hours I'm teaching at Harvard Medical School, and then I write books, and then I give, I don't know, 60, 80, maybe more than that talks a year." So I'm bouncing around all over the place doing probably too many things. Trying to streamline, but yeah, do a lot of stuff, but a lot with families, and kids and partnerships and writing and sort of how to best support people who are going through hard times, basically, at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I knew you'd be perfect. And the irony is that you're doing all these things, but mindfulness is one of your specialties, right?
Yes, mindfully doing 100 things at once.
No, I can relate, even though mindfulness is not one of my specialties. So you know that the people watching this are dealing with tremendous stress. We're I'm a high conflict divorce coach, and we specialize in legal abuse. So that's families or one particular party that's dealing with a difficult person, usually in the legal system or afterwards in a co-parenting situation. Custody battles are our specialty, unfortunately. And so the kids are often stuck in the middle of these really difficult situations. And that's why I thought, especially with your background, that you would be uniquely helpful in giving some ideas on what to do. So I was thinking, like I was telling you that because the kids are often going back and forth between two houses, that parents have a lot of fear, especially when their child is at the other person's house, because often there's abuse involved and they feel like they can't be that buffer anymore. And so you told me that there's things that people, it's almost like shifting the mindset about how to manage it. So when someone has a child at the other parent's house, what should they be doing instead of throwing themselves on the floor crying?
The parent or the child?
The
Oh, it is
parent.
so hard. I mean, I think, it's so easy. It's so much easier said than done to be like, oh, let it go, acceptance. And I always sort of feel like that's such a, like, getting that advice. I'm like, I'm trying to let go, but it's like stuck to me. How do I actually let go? But I do feel like the best things that we can do are some degree of like, okay, this is what the situation is. What can I do now to make myself stronger while I have this little bit of time to myself? So maybe it is a night, maybe it's a couple of days, but how can I be really working on myself so I can show up as strong and present as possible for my kid when they get back, so that I can be as, alert for any, potential problems that might be arising, so I can keep myself calm so that I don't fly off the handle and sort of lose my credibility if there is a conflict with the other parent in the situation. The more I'm taking good care of myself during that, whether it's a couple-hour visit or a couple-day visit, the better that's going to be for my kids, and the better it's going to be for even the most toxic relationship that we're trying to extract ourselves from. That really is the best that we can do. So that's maybe exercise. I would of course say meditating, but I would say being with friends, like loading up your therapy time, like doing those yoga classes, like getting out there, doing all those things that you do to be your best self. And that doesn't mean just distractions. It means like working on yourself in those times, because it is actually this opportunity, this little bit of a break for you to strengthen yourself, you know, physically, emotionally, socially, working at all those muscles to give yourself the support that you needed, to tap into the support that you need during that time that you have.
Yeah, I think I remember you saying something like, once kids come back from a household like that, they need like if it is a situation where the other parent has this dysregulated environment that it is so important to come back to a place that's almost a safe space to land for children.
Absolutely. The more also then our kids come back from chaos, abuse, whatever it might be, to a place where they feel at home, they feel seen, they feel validated, they feel like they can let their guard down. That's, I mean, that not only does that make our house a place where they want to be, but it's so important for their mental health that they be able to have that space, whether it's a few minutes, a few hours, or hopefully for all of us, right, more than just that time, because then it makes it much less likely actually that they develop the anxiety, the depression, the distraction, compulsive behaviors, addictions, right, things like that that we worry about for them in the long run. When they've got that safe space, when they've got one safe adult, that's the best thing that we can offer them. So the more we're taking care of ourselves, the more we're creating that space so they come home, Mom, I'm so happy to be home, or Dad, or whoever, I'm so just happy to be home, right? They feel safe enough, right? Their nervous system calms down, regulates. It doesn't wire themselves for those mental health issues that then, of course, land them in my office. I feel like I should be always trying to put myself out of business, right? The therapist. But I think that is so important. And that's what a parent can do during those really hard breaks or times that we're not with our child and we're worried about them.
Yeah. So what you said about a child saying, I'm so happy to be back with you or happy to be home, that's actually something that a lot of our clients are saying doesn't happen. They say the child comes back home and actually lashes out at them
Mm.
or is really upset. Do you see that, or do you know why that would happen?
There's always a little bit of this. We forget how hard it is to adjust to going back and forth, even if there isn't, a toxic dynamic between the parents. It's like, think about how we feel when we, like, go away for work and are sleeping in a different hotel for a night and we get home. We're like, spinning with sort of like the stress and the unpacking. And did I remember my homework at this house? And did I remember this? And like, I miss my other friend there, even though I'm also still kind of mad at this parent. Like, there's just so much, it just takes a while for that child to settle back in. And I think for us just to remember that, to welcome them home, to let them know that we're so happy to see them. That's the number one message we want them to have. And then give them a little bit of space and offer them whatever they need to do some decompression, to get back in touch with their new space, to run to the cabinet, get their favorite snacks, to run to their room and snuggle with their favorite stuffies. Those kinds of things allow them to then reset themselves. But it's also, we know that it's not uncommon that, all of that movement around, it dysregulates a child, and that shows up as behaviors, right? Kids don't show up saying like, oh, Mom, Dad, I'm experiencing, anhedonia. And it's like, no, they're acting out what's going on. They're not, talking about their symptoms as easily as we wish they would. Certainly we adults, and maybe that not so helpful spouse really does not do a great job of modeling how to talk about emotions either, but it shows up in behavior. So we're just trying to be aware of that, and give them the space they need to settle themselves, validate, and see what they need, in that moment. Yeah. And not
Yeah.
take it personally when they lash out or they're still spinning, from a few days, because who knows, again, who knows what was planted in their head or what kind of chaos there was over there, for those days or hours. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, based on what you said before about the taking the time to yourself, we had a client recently in one of our support groups talking like absolutely hysterical because it was her son's first night staying at the other parent's house for the first time in nearly a year. And we kind of talked through, that this is actually, I know it's really scary because you're saying, should I call? Should I call? Should I call? And we said, no, because then you're kind of inflicting your own emotional stuff on this child who could be completely fine and actually was completely fine.
Right.
So
Right.
we said the main thing for you is just to take care of yourself. So everything you mentioned, like take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
She's like an athlete, and I don't know how much time she had to herself because she had been the sole parent for so long, but she was able to calm herself down. And then a week passed and we saw her again and she was totally calm. I said, how are you doing? And she said, it went so well. And then this week I was meditating. I was getting all this stuff done around the house. It was actually really fun. And I was like, that's great. And then she said, when this child came back, he was fine. So that calmed her down. So now
Right.
it's like within the span of a week, just knowing don't don't call and don't let your own stuff get involved with the situation. It worked out better for everyone. The child is calmer. He's
Right.
not afraid to go over there. He can enjoy the time, and I'm so thrilled that already so quickly things seem to be calming down.
Exactly. And you reminded me of the good stuff I said last time we spoke. But I think
Yeah.
like, what am I saying today? But also this idea of like when our child sees that we're okay, then they feel like they're safe, and then they're like, okay, I'm okay. And they don't end up in the kind of clinical language you say parentified, right? Where they're having to care for us, or we're so fragile that they're then the one caring for all their siblings, right? Because that has its own challenges down the road too in terms of caregiving behaviors and things like that, or not being able to care for themselves. So I think when they see, oh, we're okay. And I also want to emphasize, we all lose it, like especially in the midst of a high conflict divorce. We're going to break down crying unexpectedly in front of our kids, or lose our temper, or say stuff that we regret. That's normal. We are human beings. We do not have to be perfect. What we want to really do if that happens is sooner than later, if we remember, we make some sort of correction or corrective there. Dad was really upset. There's just so much going on, and I lost my temper. What's probably the best thing for me to do is to remember to go to yoga class, or remember to eat a healthy meal, or to take a walk around the block. Do you want to take a walk around the block together? Like what are some things we can all remember to do when we're having a hard time, so we don't lose our temper, we don't lose it. It's never too late to apologize to our kids either if we lose our temper with them. All of these things we can do, and we're not going to remember in that moment. We are going to lose it. It's just if we can remember some of the time to kind of clean up our own mess later, that's so great. And it's also probably the opposite of what that toxic spouse is doing. So we're really modeling something different and extra important when we take that time to make that reconnection, make that repair with the child. That's actually so important, so helpful for them in the moment and down the road.
Yeah. And I think what you said about like losing it and not being perfect, like people often feel like, especially in our client situations where there's this microscope, this invisible microscope of the court, like watching them, like, oh my gosh, if I mess up, if my kid overhears anything, I'm going to get in trouble. They live with like a constant sense of dread
Right.
that, or I'm going to damage my kids if I inflict any of my
Yeah.
pain on them. So I'm so glad you noted that you don't have to be perfect and there are ways to correct it. And it makes me think of what you had said during our last conversation, how important it is for us to model how our children can deal with difficult situations, because
Mm-hmm.
we can't protect them from it. We can't just say, I'm going to I can't swoop in and remove you from anything that makes you uncomfortable. And I
Yeah.
think people sometimes think, well, I just have to get the kid away from the toxic parent and everything's going to be okay. But we have to remember that it's a big, cruel world out there, and you are older than your children, and you might
Mm-hmm.
not be around for their entire lives to shield them. And shielding kids is sometimes not the best thing anyway, because it doesn't teach them how to cope. So the things you're describing do, because it's modeling like, this is what I need to do. I need to take
Yeah.
a walk around the block.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And having those conversations about how none of us are perfect. And again, I really appreciate, because I'm so often coming from the mental health angle, but you're raising this legal angle of also like, it is so scary. Oh, I lost my temper. Like, is this going to get back to the court? Is this going to get back to the GAL? Is this going to, right?
Yep.
There's so much on parents in these situations. And it's like, you are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to be imperfect. One of the all-time best lines from psychology. The old analysts, they were kind of misogynistic and awful, but like and very mom blaming. This one said, actually, all you need to be is a good enough mother. Maybe we can change that to good enough parent. You don't have to be perfect, just good enough, right? It's like kid will be in therapy anyway, right? It's like just
Yeah.
model those times of connection. Just model, give them those moments, show them those skills. That's the best way to teach them, that you can have conflict and come back together. You only have to be good enough. And I think that's what's important. And even when there is a longer rift, I see this a lot with clients who I work with, where one parent maybe has poisoned the well, or there is some other really challenging dynamic going on. It's really tough for those kids as they're growing up, and actually as they get older, they get wise to it. Like they're able to see that one was poisoning the well, and that one was just waiting patiently, always being loving, even if I only saw them an hour or two a week, or every other weekend. They are able to reach a point in their lives where they do start to make that connection and can start to reconnect with you. And that doesn't happen, certainly doesn't happen if we give up. And I know no one here has given up on their kids or their family, but also, like, it happens when we just keep showing up as present as possible. I love you, I miss you, I'm going to be okay, you're going to be okay. Right? At some point in their late teens or their 20s, they will come back around and see that other parent. I've seen that in my personal life with friends who grew up with high conflict divorces. I've seen it in my professional life. I've seen it everywhere. Like, your kids will come back, but that timeline is so hard to sit with sometimes, but it really is real that they come back. If you are present and loving and always there, they will know that, and that message sinks in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to get into that a little bit more, but I wanted to first ask you about the drama loop. We talked about how, let's say there is this really tough situation and the kids are stuck in the middle, and I don't know if you're going to remember what you told me, but you had an idea that I thought was a little bit unconventional, but it made perfect sense about where kids should be instead of stuck in the drama loop if possible. It involves travel.
I feel like you're like, remember, Chris, you're so good 2 weeks ago. I don't remember what I said.
Uh, it was about taking them physically out of the drama loop.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for example, summer camp.
Yeah. So this is, I think one of the things when there is just ongoing conflict. I'm thinking about a family I worked with recently where there are a number of families, and where it's like, time just away from all of it, like time with the babysitter, the nanny, great, time at camp, time at school, time at soccer. In some ways, like, the less exposure there is, and the more positive it is. Like, hopefully the other parent isn't so toxic that they can't root from the soccer sidelines or come to a visiting parents weekend at camp and say, I love you, I miss you, and not have too much time to get some of their kind of toxic well poisoning in there. That these are actually these great opportunities for kids to connect on just the positive. I think about families I work with where kids are, even like in seventh grade, but it's so clear that it's going to be so hard that sometimes it is boarding school is going to take them out of that toxic loop, and they can have just positive interactions with the parents. And there's not that, either worry, is the kid with the toxic parent? There's also not that, like, even if they are with a toxic parent for a visit, or a night out to dinner, it's not as big of a thing, as it is, when it's like, oh, they're with them this week, oof, right? But they're in a loving, caring environment. They're surrounded by peers who love them at camp or at school. They're surrounded by teammates who love them. They're surrounded by, hopefully, some other adults and counselors. And oftentimes, especially camp, what's great is it's like young people are the counselors who've maybe been through
Right.
some of this themselves, right? There's a couple other kids who are like, yeah, my parents are really hating on each other right now too. And getting a little bit of that space to connect with peers, which, again, sometimes that toxic parent can do that cutoff, not just to the spouse in that abusive relationship where they cut them off and isolate them from friends and family, but they do that to the kid, to box the kid into, the only narrative is my narrative, and don't talk to that friend, and you can't sleep over at that person's house. So if there's the possibility to agree on summer camp, time away, more after school activities, even potentially school away, or for some kids, it's like doing one of those semester long programs, even in high school, like not even not like a full on boarding school, but maybe it's, semester at sea or something like that. Again, this is about, privilege, and can families afford it sometimes, but I think that these are important things to remember too, that can be so helpful for kids to get a break from this. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think for parents in the middle of this, we feel like because it's our world that it's our kids' entire world too. But I know thinking back from, because it's for me, it's been almost 10 years since I separated from my ex. My kids are now young adults, but they were like, we were doing other things and we didn't want to talk about this stuff. Like they had their activities and things, and so sometimes we forget. And that's why it's great to have them involved, not over scheduled, but involved in all kinds of
Right.
things so they could just be a kid and not think about what's my family life like.
Exactly. And that reminds me too, I think when it comes to adults, I'm a therapist, and there's sort of, what's the expression, the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like we in the therapy business can be like, therapy for everybody. You get therapy, you get therapy, you get therapy, like 5 days a week for you, like family therapy for you, couple. And yet, like, therapy's great when it's the right time. Like, and some kids, it's not the right time. I think what I really believe as a therapist, especially for kids and teens, is like what they really need is an adult, and maybe, yeah, maybe it's a therapist, but maybe it's like a totally awesome coach. Maybe it's a math tutor or an SAT tutor who's actually really psychologically minded and has a lot of emotional intelligence, and even just says, hey, how you doing? I see you're at dad's house this week or mom's house last week. Like, you doing okay? Tell me what's good in your life, right? And then starting on the math or the SATs or whatever it is. I think remembering that, or that inspiring music teacher, or like, it's really like therapy is cool, but it's only like one way of helping a kid make a positive connection. And when parents call me up for a kid who's ambivalent about therapy, like, I really say at that first phone call, I'm like, I'll meet with your kid 3 times. If they like me, let's keep going. If they think it's helpful, let's keep going. If it's both, definitely. If it's neither, let's pause. Because what I really want for kids to have, because I've worked with too many grown-ups who are like, they show up at 45 when their marriage is falling apart, or there's something awful going on in their life. They got a drinking, who knows what. But they're like, oh, I went to therapy when I was a kid. My parents were getting divorced. Like, I would like go, we play like Uno, and they'd like buy me a donut afterwards. And it just always felt like a waste of time. And
Right.
it's like, so it never came back. The number one thing for me about therapy is that it's a good experience, or it's either helpful or you like it, or both.
Right. So no
Otherwise,
negative association. So you're saying if it's the wrong time and kids are forced to go to therapy, then they'll never actually seek therapy to help them because they'll think it's a bad thing. And in terms of you talking about other helpful adults, I just recently met a woman, and I'm going to be interviewing her on Thursday, who runs a tutoring academy. And she said that every time she has one of her tutors, and they do it all online, start a session with one of the kids, and it's not just little kids, it's like through college age. They
mhm,
do a mental health check-in and just say, hey, what's going on
love
with
it.
you? And she said it just is so disarming to them before they jump into academics, because they're able to have somebody listen to them
Yeah.
for just a couple of minutes. She said sometimes nobody listens to these kids, and they might not be in therapy. So I love what you said about that. And I'm thinking also how lucky I was. I got lucky with both my kids' therapists. It took a couple tries with one of them, but my son's first therapist was like he was like a former Hell's Angels type. He was like super cool. He'd
Uh-huh.
ride his bike to the appointment, big guy. And for a while, when they started the therapy, they would just talk about things that my son cared about. They would talk
Uh-huh.
about politics, they would talk about chess, they would talk about stuff in the news. And I was kind of like, how is this helpful? But they started establishing that really good rapport,
Yeah.
so that by the time something happened, and then they started getting into the emotional stuff, and it was so tremendously helpful. I didn't understand what was going on, because my son would be like, yeah, we just talked about this and that, and I'm like, when is he going to do something to fix
Right.
what's going on? But he was doing it, and I didn't realize that that's what was happening. And my son did have positive associations with that therapist.
Right.
The other thing too was, my son, again, in particular, in high school, he was really involved with debate. And
Mhm.
that debate coach was
Mhm.
was one of his history teachers, and also was with him for all 4 years, and really became like a father figure since my son's father kind of exited his life. So it was so helpful having that other mentor person in that role that we never planned on, but we got so lucky
Yeah.
with.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to remember this. And I think actually one of the things that's amazing, like, in some ways, like the toxic parent, like they're probably going to be against therapy, but they're also maybe a little bit authoritarian and a little bit like, they need a tutor, they need a soccer coach to
Right,
help drill
right,
them.
right.
Like, so it's like we can kind of like work with that a little bit.
That's
And my,
good to remember.
seriously, like, And my mom was a psychologist also, and I remember her saying something like, a lot of, she was like, tutors are like the unsung therapists for families that don't believe in therapy, or for parents that don't believe in therapy. And she always, like, on her Rolodex had like who she felt like were really emotionally intelligent, like tutors, helpers who really kind of got kids in a way that, for those families where where one parent wouldn't agree to therapy, like that would be the back door in.
Oh, I
And that
love
always
that.
stuck with me. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that makes so much sense. Oh my gosh, that's great. And perfect timing because I'm interviewing this woman on
She
Thursday. So
sounds
I'm
awesome.
going to start with your
I got to get
quote.
her on my Rolodex.
Yeah, yeah. Tutors are the unsung
My
heroes, unsung
Rolodex,
therapists.
like a kid even knows what that is,
I know. I know. Yeah, your contact list for whoever doesn't
exactly.
know what
Yes,
that is.
exactly.
Your contact.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, so you mentioned the term poisoning the well, and
Yeah.
we know that that is like one of the top concerns in this community. And I'm glad that you have experience with people who have grown up dealing with really. You want to actually? Why don't you say what that means in your language, and then I'll fill in if I have to.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like in those divorce or separation scenarios where there's, like a parent that maybe, hates the other parent more than they love their kids almost, or, using the kid to punish the other, right? That they're, like by poisoning the well, I mean, sort of like whispering in their ear, like your mom refuses to move out of the house. And so we're going to go bankrupt and I won't be able to pay for college. Or, your dad is is an alcoholic and that's why they can't care for you. And, that sort of like, those kinds of things where they're planting the seeds of why the other parent is the toxic one. And I think, some of this always happens to some extent. People are emotional, right? But we also know that there are toxic narcissists, that there are, parents who are really, nasty and doing this in massively unfair ways. And I think that's what I mean by poisoning the well. And it creates so much confusion for the kids. It creates such a loyalty battle for the kids. So much, it's like, well, if I'm half mom and dad says that mom is mentally ill or alcoholic or terrible in this way or stealing the money, like, then does that make me half a thief and half mentally ill and half an alcoholic, right? So, that's sort of the most sort of superficial way of looking at it. But it really is like kids need to identify with both parents and identify with the best of both parents. And that's often a question I ask kids in therapy, like, what are the best things about your parents that you think you kind of inherited emotionally, behaviorally, things like that? And what are some of the things you don't really identify with or you don't want to kind of grow into as your parent? But that's what I mean by poisoning the well, is just sort of like, whispering in the kid's ear that the other parent is the one who's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And so we call that like abuse by proxy, sometimes parental alienation or coercive
Yeah.
control, but it's really like trying to turn the child against the other parent. And often this happens in domestic abuse situations where the abuser doesn't have the day-to-day control. So we say they're limited to money, the courts, which go hand in hand, and the kids.
Mm.
And so they'll make the kids reject that other parent, and it's really hard. And again, like this is the topic I told you, Chris, of our current book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when we talked about it, you had some ideas. You've mentioned a few things that people could do, but I know one thing you said was a way that people might be able to start protecting themselves from this happening, from the child being turned against them, and a way to keep their relationship strong is to have things to look forward to. Can you get into that?
Yeah. I during the pandemic in particular, sort of reading about positive psychology and being different than sort of toxic positivity. But I do think, we feel better, and research actually finds that when we have things that we're looking forward to, right, it boosts our mood, it helps us feel more connected, all these things. So like, talking with our kids about what are the things we're looking forward to doing together, whether it's a vacation if we can afford it, whether it's, a picnic in the park, whether it's a trip to the ball game, whether it's, visiting grandparents or cooking a favorite meal. It helps us stay connected around the positive, and I think that that is just so important, and it bonds us together as we talk about the positive and what we have to look forward to and what's going well in the space of a really incredibly challenging time. We don't want to lose sight of. We don't want to pretend that things aren't really hard, but we also don't want to lose sight of like, where are these moments when we're connecting, when we're loving, when we're laughing, because we want to make sure that our kids really have those memories. So childhood from 8 to 13 during the divorce years before it was finalized, or even longer than that sometimes, right, aren't just mom and dad were fighting or the parents were fighting and it was just all awful and all trauma all the time, but like, oh yeah, then we had that, it was challenging, but we would, every Thursday we'd like have this dinner together, and we had this little, trip that we took, and we had this ritual, I think rituals, routines, even if we can't get our kids for all the holidays, which are, cultural rituals, right? We can do these other routines when we are together and put these things in the calendar that we look forward to, so that the kid doesn't look back with, that was 5 years of chaos, right? We talk about those positive things. We anticipate and we plan them together. When we invite a kid into the planning, what else that does is it invites them to feel like they have some control over their life, which feels so completely out of control. They have some say over what's happening with their time when they feel like they have no say over what's happening with their time. They might not know whose house they're going to be at, but at least when they're at this house or that house, they have this thing that they're looking forward to, or they got to help plan the meals, or they got to, plan this or that, and they feel a little bit more empowerment, and that locus of control starts to come back to them. So they don't develop that learned helplessness, which leads to depression, which leads to anxiety, which leads to, addiction, and all these things that, of course, we're terrified of our kids going on to develop. So planning things together, looking forward to things together, and looking back at what we're enjoying. It takes time for those positive moments to settle in. We have to take time to talk about them. And this is not toxic positivity. It's not, what do they call it, spiritual bypass. It really is like, we have to look at what's working, because we want to make sure our kids have some memories of positives when they look back, to connect with themselves and connect with their childhood too.
Yeah, and what you're saying about kids having some locus of control makes me think of kids having agency.
Yes, that's the
Like
word I
not
was
just that
looking
they
for. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah, like there's so much they can't control, and especially in situations like ours where they have to go back and forth between these houses, and there's all that dysregulation and having to all these transitions where they have to like remember more things, etc. That it is nice to have something where you can plan it, and it doesn't have to be like an expensive vacation
Mhm.
that you're doing together. I think about rituals that we don't even realize we're doing. Like for example, with my kids when they come back, there's this one Ethiopian restaurant that we love. And so we know like whatever we do, and it's especially like a special occasion or just we haven't seen each other, we're going to go to this Ethiopian restaurant because it's so good. And that's like where we celebrate the birthdays and other things like that. And then unfortunately, we just lost our dog. But before that, he was almost 15. He was like this big golden retriever. And we had the ritual of when the kids were around, to be like, we're going to walk the dog around the block together. So that was also a
Yeah.
chance not to be with just the dog, which was their, favorite toy forever, but to connect and talk, but without sitting face to face and being like, okay, we're having dinner together, so now we have to talk.
Right.
It was just easier. And we used to walk the dog to school when they were little, which was another kind of routine that I never thought about. I always felt kind of guilty because I'm not a cook and I don't make family dinners like that. I know people always say you should have family dinners, but I never did that. But we would
Family
always walk the
take out
dog
on
to
the
school
on
every day.
grandma's china is pretty awesome too. You make a ritual out of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And I think too about like, this came up a lot during the pandemic, just sort of thinking about trauma and post-traumatic stress, and like, trauma happens when things feel out of control and they feel unpredictable. And so the more kind of a locus of control there can be, and the more predictability there can be, and when kids feel helpless or anyone feels helpless. So how do we make things predictable? And it can be as simple as that Ethiopian restaurant, or Taco Tuesday, or game night Friday, or just like, it doesn't have to be like rigid schedule, but I think routines, just are like, they're such a relief, because if the other
Mm.
house is all chaos, right, or unpredictability and gaslighting and sort of all that stuff, right, then it's just such a relief. I know what's coming next. I get home, and then this parent like hands me a snack, and then I run around in the yard, and then I do my homework, and then I take my bath, or I do my, like, just a little bit of predictability is so helpful to actually stave off that trauma response. And when the kid can be part of building that routine together, again, that agency, that locus of control that you described is then built into that predictability. When you add in that predictability and that empowerment, the likelihood of a trauma response down the road goes way, 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 way down. And I think that's so important. And especially when it's done with that caring, loving parent who's present and able to show up physically and emotionally for that child, it goes down even further. And so all of these things I feel like are so key here. Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear, especially from an expert, on mental health. And I'm thinking that also connects to we always call it one of the top child custody factors, which is consistency, stability, and routine. That's something that the courts want to see. What are you doing as a parent to provide consistency, stability, and routine for your child? Because this is a chaotic situation, and we want to make sure, we all hopefully want to make sure this child's routine goes on as consistently as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so fun talking to you because I'm learning so much about the court side of it and like what's
Yeah,
actually important like there, and like hopefully you're learning from me, but it's really, I'm
yeah.
learning a ton. So thank you for inviting me into this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, so now I'm going to give you a tough one, and that is, since you've grown up, or you know people who have grown up who have been turned against another parent, and this
Mhm.
is like a huge issue in this community, like I keep saying, with the people that you've met who have dealt with it, can you give any hope or any ideas to people who see it happening or whose kids have already been turned against them? Like, what can they do to start trying to fix it or get them back? Because we have so much heartbreak right now where
Yeah.
people feel like it's happening. I've lost
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
I have to just let go and almost grieve a child who's still alive but won't talk to me anymore.
I mean, I feel like staying present as possible for yourself, as present as possible for the child. Like, do not be bullied into not sending that birthday card. Do not be bullied into not showing up on the sidelines. Do not be bullied, or pushed out of these other things that are your right. I mean, you got to do what the court says, I think is so important. But these other ways, and also I think remembering too that we all make mistakes. No one goes through a divorce or separation without making some mistake, right? So I mean by that also is that you don't have to, write to your child, I'm sorry I did this, I'm sorry I did that, please, right? It can just be, hey, thinking of you, happy birthday, postcard, boom, right? It can be text message, even if it's like, what do the kids say? You're left on red, right? Like 50 messages, right? That I think those actually still do really matter because they pile up, they add up. They're a little bit of, I don't know where I'm going with the metaphor, drop in the dam, straw in the camel's back,
Right.
that will eventually come through. And take that time to yourself to write about your experience, write about your curiosities about sort of how your child is doing in that moment so that when that moment comes, you can share it. And sometimes it's also writing letters and not sending them. I mean, I think all of these things, but don't give up hope. Do not let yourself get bullied. You want to follow your lawyer's advice also about contact and things like that. But I think that's what's so key, is holding that space, physically and emotionally and relationally for your child, that they are always welcome back at your house, no questions asked, to send an email to say what's up, to stop by and even talk for a few minutes or something like that. But the poisoning the well, it also happens because we're not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
No amount of being perfect, we're still going to say something we regret. No matter what we do, there's going to be fuel for the fire when the toxic parent is whispering in that child's ear, somehow. So don't beat yourself up. I should have said this. Shouldn't have said that. I've got to. There'll be time for that conversation. It will come. But I know that it is heartbreaking, and to take care of yourself during that time, to give yourself the self-compassion that you need, to build the resources internally, to build the resources externally, again, that social support, emotional support from friends and professionals, and as well as the financial independence that you need and the legal support that you need for this. Unfortunately, what your spouse has made into a battle, which should just not be a battle, but should just try to put the child's best interest first. So I'm with you with the heartbreak, and my heart goes out to all of you parents in that position.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So, so Chris, how can people find you and what are you up to? I mean, I know you talked about your latest book and you've done like 40 books.
20.
20. Okay, I was like, I know it's like some huge amount. 20 books. Okay, so what are you up to and how can people find you or what's
Yeah, you
going on
can
with
find
you?
me here on Instagram at Dr. Chris Willard. You can find my website, drchristopherwillard.com, drchristopherwillard.com. I'm doing workshops all the time, around the country, around the world, online. I've got a couple courses that I offer, about mindful parenting, about mental health and parenting, about post-traumatic growth is a topic of mine. Supporting kids in the college years is the new project I'm working on. I'm actually, after that project, I'm hoping to actually write more about communication, and the
Mhm.
neuroscience of communication, because goodness knows we need that. Although it's probably everyone's spouse that needs to read it, not just us. But
Oh,
uh, I
I was going to
know
say we
we
teach
need
strategic communication more than
strategic
anything. That's a huge thing.
communication. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big thing.
But thank you for
Yeah.
having me. This has been a really, for me, a really enlightening conversation. So it's been a
Oh,
privilege.
for me too, and definitely for our audience now and for later who will see the recording. So I thank you so much for taking the time and let's touch base and do it again. All
Absolutely.
right,
Take care, Lisa. Thank you
take care.
so
You're
much.
welcome.
Yeah.
Bye.